Hey guys, Mike here with EBR, and today we're taking a first look at the new Lectric XPedition 2.0. This was their popular cargo e-bike or utility e-bike, whatever you want to call it. But this time around, it's got a full bump in specs from front to back. It's got more capability, improved handling and ride, yet somehow they found a way to keep it at the exact same price in true Lectric fashion. So stick around and let's take a deep dive into the new Lectric XPedition 2.0 and see what makes this beast a true e-bike cargo machine. All right guys, the new XPedition 2.0 by Lectric. This is a class 1, 2, or 3 e-bike, meaning you can get pedal assistance up to 28 miles an hour. And when it comes to pricing, they have priced this somehow at the same $13.99 price point. And that's with a whole slew of upgrades we're gonna talk about in just a few moments here. And somehow in 2024, Lectric keeps finding a way to add more bike value and not raise the price. So kudos to them for pulling that off. Now, this bike is safety standard tested to not only UL, but also a DIN certification. Now, UL, it is UL 2849 certified and UL 2271 certified on the battery. And then they went a step further with a DIN certification. Now, if you don't know what a DIN certification is, don't feel bad. I had no idea either, and I had to go look it up. And I've got my notes here to help me cheat and repeat that back to you so I don't screw it up if I try to remember it. Now, they say our DIN certification is from the German Institute for Standardization. It ensures safety and durability. Specifically, the DIN 79010220 rating applies to cargo e-bikes like the XPedition 2.0. It confirms the frame and fork are built to handle heavy loads safely. Meeting the standard means the XPedition basically can reliably and safely carry that 450 pounds like it's marketed for. Now, outside of that, in addition to those safety and durability testings, they've made some changes to the frame that likely helped it get to this level. So they've extended the wheelbase out a bit, changed some of the tubing on it, and ultimately just made the bike a little bit longer, and they say makes the bike handle better under load and just a little bit more stable. And I can personally say from riding the bike out in Arizona that it did feel very stable, and when I added whatever extra weights I had with me at the time, I did get the bike up to about 270 pounds, and it still felt really good riding it. And if you've ever ridden a cargo e-bike that says it can handle a big max payload and you actually put it to that test and really crank up the weight on it, sometimes those bikes can feel a little too flexy, a little bit unstable, just because you have all that extra weight, flexing the frame in different directions. And on this bike, it felt very solid, very good. And I was really pleased to see them make those small tweaks to the frame and ultimately a more stable cargo bike, because in the world of cargo, stability matters. Now, when it comes to weight, this bike weighs 68 pounds, and that's including the battery. I didn't take the battery off and weigh the battery independently. I just didn't have that ability at the location. But all in all, the fully assembled bike with the wheel on, battery in place, they say 68 pounds. Now, when it comes to colors and sizing, this bike comes in one frame size, and that frame size fits a pretty wide range, and that's largely thanks to its low step-through height and easy accessibility. But that range is 4'11" all the way up to 6'5", so pretty much anybody I personally know between 4'11" and 6'5" will have no problem getting on the bike. And ultimately, at 5'11", for me, it felt very, very stable, very comfortable, and I had no issues with the fit at all. Now, when it comes to colors, they have 2 color options, which again is pretty typical of Lectric. They have minimal color options and minimal frame sizing options, but I think that's part of their secret sauce on how they're able to kind of roll in more value to next releases without raising prices, so I'm not going to complain there. Now, the 2 colors they offer are Raindrop Blue and Stratus White. Now, those 2 colors are basically a light blue and a traditional white, and both of them have a glossy finish. To me, they both look good, no issues there at all. Now, when it comes to the payload capacity, I've already mentioned it's a pretty substantial 450 pounds, but there's a small caveat. That 450 pounds must be split up between no more than 330 as rider weight and no more than 300 as cargo weight. So that can be any mix and match you need, as long as those 2 ends don't exceed those limitations. So for example, you could have a 180-pound rider like myself and my 2 children if they're roughly 85 pounds apiece, 170 pounds total in the rear, 180 up front, and we're still under that 450-pound max payload capacity. So that's a pretty substantial cargo weight capacity. So ultimately, whether you're packing groceries, gear for a long adventure, or taking a couple of kids to school, it can really handle both of those, or even put your spouse on the back. It's got a really good payload rating for front and rear cargo. So it's something that I think families, moms, husbands and wives, friends will be able to ride together and go places together on one bike, which is really cool. So some other features on the frame. So when they went with their tires, they stayed with a 20-inch wheel, which has not changed, but they did change one aspect. So now they're running a 20-inch wheel with a 2.5-inch tire. The previous model had a 3-inch tire, so 20 by 3-inch tire. Now, personally, when I rode the bike, I didn't notice any difference in how that felt. I'm sure if you got down to a granular level, it would have some impact on handling and things like that. But to me, the bike felt still playful, fast, quick, easy to handle. So no complaints in that tire size for me at all, really. Now, when it comes to fenders and racks, so the bike has front and rear fenders that are included with it, as well as a very beefy rear cargo rack that we discussed can carry up to 300 pounds. So this thing is definitely built to handle your chores and more. Now, when it comes to mounting points, if you want to kit it out for some specific use case that you have, you not only have the 300-pound cargo rating in the rear rack, but you also have a slew of accessories. You can add things like storage bags, pannier bags, child seats, cargo racks, or you can kit it out yourself with some of their bosses and mounting points in place. You've got 3 bosses on the down tube, you've got 2 on the seat tube, and you also have some on the front head tube to mount something like a front rack or front basket. Ultimately, the bike is able to carry a lot of stuff, and with all those extra attachment points, you can kind of just go crazy how you want to kit it out. Now, when it comes to lighting, it's got a larger front headlight than the previous model, and it has a rear integrated taillight, brake light, and they've added turn signals to this one, which is very cool, especially for those of us who ride into work or ride through towns every day like I do. I wish all my bikes had turn signals. I'm just not going to put them on all my bikes. But it's nice to see that's on there, and it makes it easier for those of us who do need to ride in traffic. So when it comes to the motor and battery, this is another area that got a spec bump. So we've already talked about frame improvements, durability testing, improved lighting, and turn signals. So there's a lot going on just at the front curb appeal level of the bike with their upgrades, but now in the motor and battery, things get a little fun. So we've still got a 750 watt rear hub motor that has 85 Newton meters of torque, and it can peak it up to a pretty substantial 1310 watts. Now previously, this had a cadence sensor, but now we've got a torque sensor in this motor with PWR Plus programming. And PWR Plus programming will essentially take the best of both worlds. It uses some of the cadence sensor magnets, and it also has a torque sensor, and it will ultimately give you the most reliable natural feel that it can for a rear hub motor. So when you start turning those cranks, the cadence magnets will pick that up and give you a little bit of power just to get you going. And then once you dial in how much you want by how hard and how fast you pedal, that's when that PWR Plus programming goes to work and tries to match your effort for a pretty natural, intuitive riding experience. I rode the bike quite a bit down in Arizona, and it felt really good. I think the PWR Plus that they use in most of their newer models, it's just dialed in really well, and it feels really good on this bike. And I think with a cargo load on it, it was a very good choice. Now, when it comes to riding modes, you have PAS levels 1 through 5, obviously 1 being the weakest, 5 being the strongest, and they gradually move up from there. Now, when it comes to the battery itself, we still have a 48 volt battery, but we have quite a few options. So the standard option is a 13 amp hour battery, but they also have a long range option that's a 26 amp hour battery. And then they have a ultra mega, I think they call it the long range mega option. And that has a 35 amp hour dual battery setup. Now, when it comes to the battery on this bike, they still have a 48 volt battery that is externally mounted in the frame between the seat and the rear rack. Now this time, the standard option is a 13 amp hour battery that promises up to 60 miles of range, but they have 2 more optional upgrade options that will push that range and power out even more. There is a 26 amp hour version, basically 2 13 amp hour batteries, and that will give you what they say is up to 120 miles of range, which is very substantial. And then they have their, I think they call it their long range mega option, which gives you 2 17 amp hour batteries, or 17.5 amp hour batteries. That gives you a total of 35 amp hours for a whopping 170 miles of range on a single charge between the 2 batteries, which is wildly big. So whether you're picking a very long trip or just don't like charging your bike often, if you go with some of these extended battery options, 170 miles is a pretty substantial number of range when it comes to an e-bike. And like all the batteries they offer, it comes with a set of keys, and you can lock that for storage or off the bike charging. All in all, it's a new setup that offers more range, more power, a more efficient motor, and a better sensor. All in all, they did a really good job with the motor and battery on the new XPedition 2.0. All right, guys, so when it comes to components on the XPedition 2.0, I'm gonna start with kind of the basics, the drivetrain. So in the rear, we previously had an 11 to 28 tooth rear cassette, with a 7-speed rear derailleur. Now we have an 8-speed Shimano rear derailleur with an 11 to 34 tooth rear cassette. So ultimately a wider range of gears and one more gear to work with, which really just makes it easier to deal with varied terrain or steep hills. You just have more to work with and more to tackle those obstacles in front of you. Now, the remaining up front chainring is still a 46 tooth alloy chainring with a chain guard, and that's mated to 170 millimeter cranks. And on the ends of those cranks are the electric pedals that we've now seen on a few bikes and have kind of come to grow on me. They are their quick release pedals. They have a quick release collar you can slide off and quickly remove or reapply the pedals. No need to grab tools. It's just a super easy way to get the pedals on and off. Say you need to pack the bike up into a narrow area, the pedals are sticking out. This is just a really easy way to deal with that. Now, when it comes to the brakes, they remained with the same 2-piston caliper hydraulic disc brakes that have 180 millimeter rotors front and rear. Now, those rotors have a slightly thicker density at 2.2 millimeters than the more commonly seen 1.8, so that's going to give you a little bit better cooling and stopping power in general. I'd like to see maybe a 4-piston caliper setup on this or even a 203 millimeter rotor, but that's really just me guessing and wanting more than I get in this bike, because the reality is they've upgraded so many parts to it and kept the price the same. I really have nothing to complain about. And personally, I rode the bike in Arizona and the stopping power felt fine. I'm just asking for more. Now, speaking of upgrades, this bike now has a front suspension fork. So previously it was rigid, and now we have a front suspension fork with 50 millimeters of travel. It's called the Courier 50, which is where that 50 mil of travel comes from. But it's nice to see it has through axle support, which is a better beefed up support system for a wheel to fork kind of mating combination. And on a bike that's meant to carry up to 450 pounds, I really like seeing through axle support there. And it's got a dual rate coil spring inside. Now, the cockpit on this bike has an adjustable stem, so you can kind of play with the stem and get a reach that works best for you. The bar itself is kind of a flat bar like you'd see on most like folding bikes, that kind of right out in front of you flat bar. Now, this bar has ergonomic grips or lock-on grips on both sides, as well as hydraulic disc brake levers on both sides. Now, on the left, you do have your control buttons for the power and PAS controls for the display. And on the right-hand side, you have your trigger shifters, which is a very good bump up in spec as well, because previously we had the Shimano index shifters that were the over-the-bar, like clunky push button style that just felt kind of old and outdated and not very intuitive. So really nice to see a more modern Shimano trigger shifter under the bar. It's just easy to access. You don't need to look or think about it when you shift. And I think at this point, most people are used to those. So it's just good to see those get updated as well. Now, when it comes to that rear rack we spoke about earlier, underneath those on cargo utility bikes, they generally will have some sort of safety shroud around that rear wheel, which ultimately just keeps little ones who are sitting behind you from maybe putting their fingers or shoes getting them caught in the wheel while you're riding down the road. As you can guess, that would not be good. But Lectric got feedback on the last model and learned that because there was no venting in there, it created kind of a loud echoing sound when they would ride the bike. But this time around, they added multiple venting slots that allow the sound to escape, and just, it's kind of a comfort thing. It just takes that annoying echo sound away while you're riding. It definitely didn't need to be addressed, but it's cool that they listened to all that feedback and address it. Now, speaking of listening to feedback, one of the other areas people had concern with on the XPedition 1.0 was the kickstand. Now, a kickstand on a utility or cargo bike needs to be durable, and it also needs to be kind of centrally mounted, because if you just have a typical bike kickstand on the rear wheel at an angle, when a bike's under a heavy load or carrying a lot of gear, it's just ultimately going to be easy to tip over and fall. Well, on the 1.0 edition, they had a centrally mounted under the bike dual leg kickstand, but they found from feedback from customers that it just wasn't quite beefy enough, didn't have a large enough footprint, and it could still be easily tipped or put off balance. Maybe not easily, but it happened enough that they got the feedback. And this time around, they went with a much beefier kickstand that has a larger footprint and ultimately feels much, much more stable. Kind of played around with that when I was at the headquarters a few weeks ago, and it feels much better. And I think it's just one of the ways that Lectric listens to their customers and tries to ultimately just improve with each new release. And when it comes to displays and apps, so like I said, Lectric does have a lot of spec bumps here, and this time around we got a new color display centrally mounted on the handlebar. Now, previously the 1.0 version had a duotone, kind of an old school calculator font look to it. Nothing wrong with it, I found it perfectly fine. But this time around we got a full color display, a better looking user interface or just kind of layout to it, more modern look. And it has all the basic ride data you would need, things like your battery level, your odometer, your speed, your PAS level, trip meters, things like that. And you can go in there to some more advanced settings, change it between class 1, 2, and 3, as well as tweaking some other small adjustments on the back end. Now, this display is not only colorful now, but now it has USB ports for charging your phone on it, as well as IP65 water and dust resistance should you be stuck out in the rain or out on the trail. Maybe not on a cargo bike, but you get the idea. It's built to kind of deal with the elements outside, which is also nice to see. Now, some people have asked me about where's Lectric's app for their bikes? Well, Lectric has, to my knowledge, never had an app for their bike, and that remains true with this one. The displays, from what I've seen, have everything you need, and if I'm being completely honest, most times, even on my personal Specialized that has app connectivity, I almost never connect it to the app. I just use the controls on the handlebar, and it's always super sufficient for me. So that's just putting that out there. If you're wondering about an app, there is no app, and all the basic data you need is right on the display. So that is the new Lectric XPedition 2.0, kind of in a nutshell. Now, obviously we didn't have one here with us to take out on a ride and talk to you with our mechanic, but rest assured, as soon as they send us one, or if they send us one, I will definitely be releasing a full review where we'll go out on ride qualities, we'll talk to our mechanic, but I at least wanted to share with you and kind of highlight the fact that Lectric listened to a lot of feedback, upgraded almost all the areas people wanted improvements, even areas people didn't ask for, made the bike much better. And somehow in 2024, where everything seems to be more expensive, they once again found a way to keep it the exact same price. So hats off to Lectric for pulling that off, and thank you to them for bringing us out to kind of play with their bikes and learn about the new upgrades they put on them. And ultimately, just wanted to share that with you guys. At the end of the day, there is a lot of new spec. We have a torque sensor on the motor. We have improved frame design and durability testing with that DIN certification. We have more range, more battery options, improved drivetrain options and shifters and gear ratios. There's just a lot going on. And again, it kept it at the same price. So if you've been looking for a cargo style or utility style e-bike to carry a lot of gear, and one that's been refined over the years and listening to feedback from customers of the past, definitely give the new Lectric XPedition 2.0 a look. Hopefully it meets your needs. If I've missed any questions that you may have about this bike, drop them down below. And if I don't have the answer, I can always reach out to Lectric and get you guys an answer from the source. I try to personally respond to all the comments down below, even the ones that are not nice to me. But at the end of the day, I'm here to make sure you guys know everything you can about these bikes as they're released. And until the next review comes out, I'll see you guys out on the trail.